The creature's enormous tentacles destroyed the rest of the orphanage, throwing debris towards the agents, who scattered into one side. The monster was huge, at least 6 or 7 meters tall. Its body was covered with an exoskeleton that didn't completely cover it, and left some parts exposed, and its face was a deformed mixture of Irving and the tyrant. Its huge left arm, supported by thick long claws, and its right arm was covered in tentacles similar to the licker's tongues. Hung's Delta team fired in conjunction with the B weapons, hitting the creature hard. It staggered back a few steps as small explosions rippled through his body, destroying part of the exoskeleton and disintegrated the exposed flesh. The monster roared its tentacles on its right arm and lunged at Hunk, who was the closest agent. The agent, for his part, jumped backwards and rolled across the ground, dodging the tentacles that dug into the dirt in an attempt to pierce him. Taking advantage of the momentum in his roll, Hunk picked up the heavy hand grenade and threw it towards the creature. The grenade detonated in a huge explosion, and Chris, along with Jill and Parker's team, fired together at the creature as their bullets piercing was a little of what's left of the thing's exoskeleton, penetrating deep into its flesh. Hunk's team fired again, and the monster's huge right arm fell to the ground, severed it from its body. The creature fell to its knees on the ground, its deformed head slowly rising while it was still being shot at. What was left of Irving's consciousness was probably mentally cursing himself for not imagining that the reinforcements Chris would have to be heavily armed with weapons of the highest caliber. If the soldier had to be alone, the fight would probably have gone on for a long time, and who knows who could have died. What the monster had become was out of luck. The giant mutant raised its huge arms with its claws and attempted to attack the nearest agents, who quickly retreated. The impact of the blow made the ground in the surrounding area shake with force. A cloud of dust rose in the air with the strong impact, and its huge claws penetrated the ground. One last move in an attempt to do something to take care of them with it. The BSAA soldiers seized fire and faced kneeling the monster, grunting in pain and bleeding on the ground. The thing's regeneration seemed to be slowing down, probably because of the bullets in the B-type weapons. They looked at each other, and Jill focused her eyes on the surviving orphans, still lying on the ground within the distance, frightened and shocked. Out of all the people they had found, only 3 had survived. Although they had managed to save these 3, it certainly didn't feel like a victory. Hunk straightened his posture, facing the defeated monster, and signaled for his team to finish it off at once. Shots were heard at the same time. The creature that Irving grunted loudly, a roar of pain escaping from its deformed, blood-soaked mouth. A huge moment of pus began to practically squirt out of its body along with the blood. Its huge body began to disassemble as if it were melting, and in a matter of moments, the monster fell to the ground. Target eliminated, one of Hunk's men said over the comm. Good, now it's time to clean up this crew, he said, approaching the fallen body of the monster. Chris watched as the agent approached the monster, then turned his attention to Jill beside him. Are you alright? He asked. She was slightly dirty then from the dust caused by the destruction of the orphanage. So was Parker, who just looked as distressed as the woman. I could be better, she replied, looking at the orphans in the same position as before, now being approached by the medical team. Look, I've seen a lot, but I'll never forget seeing that little boy have his chest punctured right in front of me, Parker said, holding his rifle with some force as he looked at the destruction caused. So what exactly happened? He asked Chris. I don't know much. This Irving guy was some kind of black market dealer. From what I could gather, hearing the tyrant who followed his orders, unlike the others, this one was focused on the murder, he explained briefly. Great, superhuman assassins, Parker said with uncertain sarcasm. The group's eyes then focused on the movement coming from the wreckage of the orphanage, as well as the attention of the agents nearby. Soon their expressions twitched slightly in curiosity and surprise when they saw a blond man rise from the wreckage. They blinked a few times, watching a man approach with long, heavy strides, barely glancing at the body of the fallen creature next to him. He had youthful features, His eyes bore the scars, and his expressions were both experienced and youthful. His blonde hair was long, with a very style very different from where would have fought for an agent with the caliber. They recognized who it was, the way he walked, the equipment, the body language. That image they had of a mysterious agent was shattered into 1,000 of pieces. Hunk was also stared at him. Difficult to know exactly what he was thinking about since of the gas mask, but probably because he was curious about the agent. "What happened to your mask?" was the first thing Hunk asked, and Ghost snorted. "Oh, it must be ashes by now," he said, noticing some soldiers approaching. "So Ida saw your face?" Hunk concluded, and Ghost crossed his arms. "She already knew, and she knows about you too," he said, noticing a slight attention to his partner's shoulders. "We've got a big problem. She's got a file on us, and she's just sent it to the same people who hired her to come after me." Hunk then looked away and raised his head slightly. Another setback was another dangerous one. Not because of their identities were revealed to dangerous people, but it was because it would certainly buy Albert more time to organize a new plan. "Fuck's sakes. Delta team, clear this thing's body as soon as possible. Let's fall back. We got a situation now," he ordered everyone, walking at a fast and heavy pace towards the extraction point, passing Chris and his team without saying an afterwards. Ghost just followed right behind. "A situation?" Jill asked, looking at him with curiosity. In terms of appearance, it hadn't been for his build, but he carried himself and the scars. She would never have guessed that he was a skilled agent. More like a model. "I'll explain on the way," Ghost said, hastening his steps. Chris and Jill looked at each other before signaling to their team. They returned to extraction point, boarded the military helicopter to the left, glancing at the Delta team boarding at the helicopter, right with serving orphans. All of the agents were in a hurry, and the situation seemed to be urgent, which left the BSAA soldiers somewhat confused and distressed. If Hunk and Ghost were distressed, then it meant something very bad. "Jill, Parker, O'Brien's on the line," a member of the Delta team said, and the soldiers looked at each other. "I'll go. You stay here, Jill," Parker said, approaching the helicopter to the right. While Jill watched him for a few moments before entering one of the approaching. Chris, who was sitting next with his hand on his rifle, a doubled expression on his face. He sat down next to him shortly afterwards, and the pilots started up the helicopter. They heard Hunk outside telling them to get ready. "Did you get anything?" the woman asked Chris, who sighed slightly. "Yes, I think so. Let's see what information we have collected when we arrive," Chris said, watching with a certain intensity as Hunk and Ghost walked near the helicopter's entrance ramp. "What is it?" Jill asked, realizing that she had something on him. "Just thinking, O'Brien's not going to like the way things turned out," he said, nodding slightly as if agreeing with his own thoughts. Indeed he did. The conversation he had with Ghost, the time he had spent with him, Hunk, and his team, they made him realize that playing fair with terrorists was stupid. "What do you mean?" Jill asked. "The BSAA isn't respected. Not by USSOCOM, not by DSO or the bunch of terrorists. Not as it should be. But we do have a great potential of them. We're all throwing it away, and we have just realized it," he said, remembering his words from before. When they reached and revealed everything that went on behind the scenes, the world would enter a state of fear. It was inevitable, and even among those who agreed with Ghost and Hunk's actions. However, they would help keep things under control, as he and the founders of the BSAA would do anything in his power to help. He realized that they had a chance there, a real chance, and what could have been done was just a silly hope for them for becoming a reality than they imagined. The helicopter began to gain altitude, and Chris watched as Ghost approached and sat down not far from where they were. "So, what's the situation?" Chris asked, watching the agent still without his mask. He had to admit that he never expected as skilled as dangerous soldiers can be. Like that, a pretty boy. Different from the experienced agent he had imagined. The world was really full of surprises. "You know about Ida, right?" he asked, not looking at them, more focused on rummaging through the military bag at his feet and grabbing a spare mask. "A mercenary, she worked for Albert. She didn't receive any more news about her for a while. Jill replied, resting her arms on her legs and leaning her torso slightly forward. She knows who I am, he said, staring at the mask for a few moments, distant, even a distressed look. She has a file with me and my Hunk's identities, and she has sent it to the people who hired her to kill me. Chris grunted lowly, shaking his head slightly. Well, it could have been very problematic. In fact, it was very worryingly, because he didn't know who hired the woman, but he knew very well dangerous and powerful people. They'll know we're involved with you, he said, more to himself than even so. Ghost shook his head in agreement. They're powerful people, Chris. They'll send people after my family, and maybe, who knows, they might try and convince the world the BSAA are traitors. He crossed his arms, swinging his leg with a certain frenzy, but after putting his mask back on, indicating the nervousness. Something unusual to see. Shit, more of that now, Chris grumbled, running his hand through his hair. Ghost for his part sighed. Claire and Sherry could be a target, Ghost said, and Chris gave him a serious look. We don't know if they'll target the BSAA. We have a lot of weight, so it wouldn't be easy, Jill said, and Ghost closed his eyes. No, not because of that, but because I'm involved with them, he said. Both soldiers' expressions twitched slightly. What are you talking about? Chris asked, seriously. He knew that Sherry had started training with Ghost. She had mentioned it to him and show off her knife skills, but he didn't mind. It was good that she was honoring her skills, not to mention that Ghost was skilled. If anything, he should thank him. But he knew for the fact that he was training her as well for no reason for those people to risk and spend as so much as to try to stop against the BSAA. I know they're survivors from Raccoon City, he said, and Chris's muscles tense. They had never mentioned it to anyone other than Parker and Jill, ever. Not even to O'Brien. As far as he knew, there was no proof. But of course there was nothing of what it seemed to be that guy was involved. I don't know if I should be surprised, but I really don't like where this is going, Chris warned him, his voice low and serious, his hand gripping the barrel of his rifle with some force. Did they mention anyone? A cop, maybe? He said, and Chris blinked a few times. A guy called Leon, he answered for a few moments, and Ghost shook his head. That's me, he said, turning his face deep into the man's eyes. They don't know, but some do. Chris was silent for a few moments, digesting the information. At first he remembered the state of both girls when he found them. Dirty, lost, desolated, into an unknown city. When he took them home, they both cried and had nightmares every night. They thought they knew how to hide it well, but they disguised it. He knew very well. After all, he had been through the same thing, and it hurts his chest to see them like that. It took them a long time for them to get better, and he remembered how much they had cried for a cop called Leon, a hero who had saved their lives more than once, and the asshole who left them alone on a desolated road. However, he also remembers the way they talked about him, and what he did, and now how he saved their lives. In all honesty, he'd always had a cold shoulder towards the guy. So you're the officer who helped them and abandoned them on the desert road? He asked, a little anger present in his voice. Not that he wanted to show Ghost, but for his part he snorted. But didn't deny it. I've got some things to say, but it's not my place to say them. If you're telling the truth, then I have to ask why. He asked, and although deep down he suspected something would have to do with what he did now, what he was, the mask he wore. I made a deal, remember? I said that William's goal was to eliminate everything and everyone related to these viruses. That included the two of them. They're not normal girls, and you and I know it. The virus has changed them, Ghost said. He wanted to kill them, Jill said, as the statement was a question. And Ghost shook his head. I didn't let him. He would let them live. In return, I would work for them. I had the experience he needed to spend a lot of resources finding us. It would have been a huge waste if he killed me, Ghost explained, looking away. Jill and Chris looked at each other, and the other older Redfield calmed down. His mind was thinking more clearly, thinking rationally. He had not only risked his life to save them, but it literally exchanged his for theirs. That wasn't something you don't see in just anyone. Why did you do that? He asked, and Ghost laughed even though it wasn't funny. Because that's the man I was, he replied, and Chris lowered his gaze thoughtful. What I would tell you is in the file in Ida's possession. In other words, whoever hired her now knows about it, and will target both, either to kill them or something worse. They can take care of themselves. They're safe at TerraSafe headquarters, Jill said. Chris picked up his cell phone and started calling them. I wouldn't count on it. National Security Advisor will be working with TerraSafe, won't he? He's one of his black market clients. And I doubt that all this is y'all's for the people who hired Ida, Ghost explained, and Chris growled, oh, fucking hell, he muttered slowly, calling Claire and waited for her to pick up the phone. Ghost watched as Claire called his sister. He would take care of the two girls, and he would take care of his entire family. He pitied anyone who would dare to do anything against them. He leaned his forward on the torso and rested his arms on his legs. Thoughtfully, he was worried and anxious. It had been a long time since he had seen his parents and his sister. Would they be fine? Hopefully. In all those years away, only for them to be attacked by a bunch of corrupt politicians. He clenched his fist. Instead, he sighed. He grunted in surprise as he felt his helicopter suddenly rock. As he heard the pilots, the distant noises and the deafening noise, his gaze focused on the flames engulfing the back of the helicopter, and his insides growled as he heard the pilots say what they were going down. The agent gritted his teeth in anger and caused his mind to curse the name of Ida Wong, who surely caused of it. The light wind ruffled the blonde's hair, and she grunted slightly as she pulled the yellow strands out of her eyes and tucked them behind her ear. Her brown eyes now looked around lazily, observing the people sitting at the nearby tables and near the ice cream parlor. There were a few clouds blocking the sun, and to be honest, the favorable weather, she didn't really want to be there, getting fat off the ice cream. When her eyes fell over her friend Emily, who was approaching, with a milkshake in one hand and a cell phone in the other, and she shook her head, wondering how her friend never felt that she never looked where she was going. Ugh, seriously, this semester? I'm gonna go bald with so much trouble, Emily said, sitting down in the opposite chair next to her, taking a sip of her milkshake, sighing with some frustration and putting her cell phone back in her pocket. Is it Mr. Gregg or Miss Tanya? The girl asked, turning the small wooden spoon in her head. Miss Tanya, can you believe she changed the deadline again? A week early? Come on, she complained, taking another sip and resting her chin on her head. Maybe you'll wake up and get your work done, the girl said. Emily snorted. Years ahead of you, Mathilda. I already did. Mathilda arched an eyebrow. Then what's the problem? Emily shrugged. That I haven't printed or written any presentation yet. But I'll sort that out later, she replied, taking a few more sips of her milkshake, and Mathilda scraped some more on her ice cream bowl. How so? Emily stared at her subjectively, both eyebrows arched in a quiet, silent situation. Mathilda sighed slightly, but then boarded her smile. I passed the test. Emily cracked a wide smile. Ah, girl, you make me proud, she exclaimed, happy for a friend. When are you going? As soon as they finish my background check, I'm going to do some more physical and psychological tests. After that, depending on the number of openings or the institution. So I don't know, Mathilda said, once again tucking a lock of hair behind her ear. Cool, I want to go for a ride in the car when you're a police officer, Emily said. Mathilda grimaced a little. Of course, I'll get the handcuffs ready for you and put you in the back seat. Let's see what your parents say. They both laughed slightly, and Emily shrugged. They'd probably love it, she joked. They both remained silent for the next few moments. Mathilda focused on her ice cream, and Emily on her milkshake. So what is it that you want, right? Emily asked, uncertainty with breaking silence. Mathilda just stared at her with her arched eyebrows. Like you two are 21 years old and you've passed the exam to become a police officer. There's a certain connection behind it. Mathilda lowered her gaze, understanding her friend's point. You go because you really want to, not because you feel obliged to do, don't you? The girl sighed, remaining silent, but for a few moments thoughtful. Yes, that's what I want. I don't want to feel obliged or anything, I just feel that what I should do. I've always been interested in, well, after my brother died, I think it's the way to honor his memory, she replied, eternally satisfied with her answer. If that's what you want, great. There's this guy who's been calling me, and I want you to get rid of him, Malfadez laughed. But already? I don't even own my own gun yet. So, special order. They stood there for a little while longer, until they got up and paid and left the ice cream parlor, chatting with about trivial things. Neither of them noticed the two men watching from afar. They walked calmly along the sidewalk, taking advantage of the little traffic that was on that Sunday. Malfadez focused her eyes on the three men in front of her, talking to each other as if they were friends, not even paying attention to the two, and didn't think anything of it. However, she felt a bad sensation in her chest, which she didn't think it was anything. She just ignored it. She approached the man and she heard the sound of the van further back. As she turned around, she only could see the back of the van approaching for a few moments, before she was suddenly grabbed by one of the men, and her mouth was covered with his hand. She tried to scream, to struggle, but they were stronger than her, and soon she felt something cold on her neck, followed by a slightly sharp pain. Her neck went numb and she had sensation went spread through her body. Her eyes grew heavy, and all she could do before she gave in to despair was her friend having a syringe in her neck, also injected with something. Both men put both girls in the van and entered the vehicle. Sir, we have the girl. She was with a friend and we captured her too. What do you want us to do with her? One of the men said through his communicator, alluring the gaze between the two unconscious girls. Well, we have no choice but to include her in all this, the man's voice said from the other side of the communicator, and the man nodded to himself. Going to Mr. and Mrs. Kennedy out, said the man, just before signaling the driver to speed up. Claire finished typing up her report and handed it to her team, as well as some printed for the press. People needed to know about the situation, and she was happy to help with that, spread the truth. As she walked towards TerraSafe headquarters to finish the remaining work, she felt a chill run down her spine. She heard the murmurs and felt as if she was being watched. The people around her began to emanate a cold sensation. She blinked a few times in confusion. Her instincts was a warning that something was wrong. She hurried the steps as she approached the TerraSafe. In the distance, she could see a blonde figure approaching. Claire, Sherry called after, approaching at a rapid pace. The woman smiled, but when she saw the girl's expression, she knew that she too sensed something was wrong. Are you feeling it too? She asked quietly as she approached the girl, who nodded. I don't know what it is, she said, and Claire reached for her cell phone as she felt it vibrate. Her confused eyes ran across Chris's message. Strange it was marked that it was sent almost 12 hours ago. Her eyes widened as she finished reading. Claire took Sherry by the arm and began to walk away when they saw some men coming out of TerraSave. Men dressed in black suits arrived as part of the Simons team. The girl was confused, but followed the woman without a question. As she felt her body shiver, she felt the stares following them. What is it? Sherry asked, now walking alongside Claire at the same speed. Simons knows about us, Claire said, turning the corner and running her eyes around. Her car was in a TerraSafe parking lot, and she wasn't going to risk going back to her vehicle. What the hell? Sherry grumbled. Where's Chris? She asked. I don't know. He just left a message that was reportedly sent 12 hours ago. It seems that Simons was involved in the black market, Claire explained, looking back and seeing more of the men accompanied the Simons still following them. They continued walking, blending in with the people on the busy streets, in hopes that they would lose the men. But their hopes were slightly dashed when the black car, with the tinted windows, began to slow down and practically followed them as they walked. Claire clicked her tongue as they approached the corner, and they were forced to stop when a figure approached in front of them. The figure was wearing a brown overcoat, was tall and had light hair, delicate features, but with a strong chin. A man. Surrender. His voice was velvety but in neutral, almost robotic tone. Claire gritted her teeth, and she took a few steps back. However, he opened a part of his overcoat. Both the woman's eyes opened slightly when they saw that the man had his body explosive. It was certainly no ordinary man, but she was willing to blow up those civilians with him, along with himself, just to capture them. "Come peacefully," he said, and swallowing some saliva, the girls were forced to cooperate for the time being. They turned her out and walked towards the black car as the other man approached. Without saying a word, entered the vehicle. The two men stood in the front seats and said nothing, and the driver just moved on. They both had short dark hair, and one passenger seat looked older than the driver. "What are you going to do with us?" Sherry asked, but they didn't answer. They didn't even mention having heard their question. "Where are they taking us?" Claire asked, and the man in the passenger seat just turned his head slightly in his direction, but again just ignored her. Claire sighed as she wasn't going to let herself be captured easily. Not again. Not a chance. She was waiting for the perfect moment to grab the head of the man in the passenger seat and crushed it with her bare hands. Looking out of the rear view mirror, she saw the other two black cars following close behind. They weren't alone, which made things a little bit more complicated. A firefight was sure to break out, and she didn't want to risk Sherry getting caught up in it. They left the city after a few minutes, and Claire was counting on seconds to act. When they got far enough away from town and saw that the road was practically empty, she looked at Sherry with serious eyes, who looked back at her. The girl swallowed some saliva and nodded, understanding what the look had meant. Claire stared down at the man in front of her again, but before she could do anything, she heard the roar of the car's engine just from behind. As she turned, her eyes watched in surprise as a military car simply rammed into the third black car, causing the driver to lose control and roll the vehicle down the deserted road. The noise of the rolling car caught the attention of the two dead men ahead. Up ahead, they noticed a military car, and on the second car was riddled with bullets and began to roll down the highway, and the car was now speeding towards them. Claire acted quickly when she realized this quickly and lunged at the man at the passenger seat, entwining his neck with her arms. "Sherry, the wheel!" she exclaimed, and the girl grabbed her knife and plunged it into the driver's neck. At the same time, Claire broke the driver's neck. Sherry quickly opened the door and pushed the man's body out of the vehicle, taking the wheel as she did so, slowing down the car. She both stopped the vehicle and watched as the military car parked next to the opposite side. Both women looked out at each other in uncertainty as they grabbed their pistols and got out of the car with them in hand, just in case. Out of the military car came the man in plain clothes, a blue shirt, gray pants, and black shoes. He wore glasses that looked to be in his 40s, and in his hand was a submachine gun, with a laser attached around the magazine, probably with a capacity of 45 bullets or more. "Ah, looks like you've sorted yourselves out. Good," he said, running a hand through his light brown hair. "Who are you?" Claire asked, suspicious, and her eyes focused on the woman who got out of the driver's seat. "You," Sherry said, surprised, and Claire looked at her with certain curiosity. "You're the woman who helped my friend Claire, Elia, right? So you're with Ghost?" Sherry asked, and Claire looked at the woman in front of her. She had short hair, dark skin, with a scar on her face and a neck. There was also a scar on the side of her head. This one was more recent than the two. "Exactly. We wanted to get you here before them, but unfortunately we're too late," Elia said, and Claire snorted. "So you know?" she asked, unable to stop herself from being suspicious. "Oh yes, Miss Redfield, we know. And believe me, if we didn't, you wouldn't be breathing right now," the man said, and Claire stared at him for a few moments. "I'm sorry I didn't introduce myself. My name is Walter. I'm William's researcher and doctor scientist," he introduced himself. Before either of them could say anything, they heard a noise not far away. Turning around, they stared at us as one of the cars that a tall man with a brown overcoat stood up, in the face in a neutral expression. The man straightened his posture. His overcoat was torn and dirty, and he looked wounded from the shoulder area, but strangely no blood was coming out. The group watched in disbelief as the man removed his overcoat, revealing his arm mutated in front of them, stretching out with sporting claws at the end of his hand. "What the hell is that?" Claire asked, somewhat incredulous. She had never seen a biological weapon that could talk and think like a normal person, assuming it was a biological weapon. "Maybe it's the same situation Krauser found himself in, a lucid infected. That's a Tyrant Type M, created for the variant of the T.G. Virus. I recommend we go now, Walter said, and as he was the first to get to the car, followed by Alaya and finally the two girls. The tyrant started running in towards them, his speed gradually increasing as he got closer. The tyrant looks like a human, but I've never seen that before, Claire said, looking at the creature chasing them, holding back when Alaya stepped on the accelerator. M-time tyrants were created for assassinations. In fact, the first models were created exclusively to go against Ghost and Hunk, Walter said, dragging his seat back and picking up something from the floorboard. Really? They created tyrants with two different agents in mind? Sherry asked, surprised, incredulous, but not quite sure what to think. Tyrants were extremely dangerous creatures, becoming considered as S-level threat. She wouldn't even imagine those things that those men were capable of. To scare terrorists to the point of creating a unique bioweapons for them, they really were on a different level. Walter, that thing is catching up with us, Alaya warned, looking at the rearview mirror. The tyrant was only a few steps behind the vehicle, and if it came any closer, it could hit the car with its huge arm. Okay, that's bad. Miss Redfield, could you do me a favor, please? He asked her, extending a Desert Eagle Mark XIX on their direction. A little heavier than beefer than the original model, but in other words, it was a customized model. I don't think I need to tell you to watch out for the kick, Walter said, picking up the laptop and placing it on his lap. Claire turned around and elbowed the rear window, shattering the glass. She raised the Desert Eagle and started firing, the kick being behind the shots. An untrained person would have trouble with this kind of kick. This was quite strong and not very practical for the military in general. The pressurized bullets hit the tyrant's body, who grunted and acted to feeling the bullets to hit its body, slowing down but not exactly stopping it. Claire kept firing until she ran out of bullets, which at that point the tyrant leapt forward towards the vehicle. They grunted as they felt the vehicle sway, and the weight of it was created in the back. Alaya gripped her teeth as she tried not to lose control, and Claire just stared at the tyrant, clinging to the back of the car. "Sherry, get down!" she shouted as she saw the tyrant move, and both women ducked, dodging the creature's huge claws, which destroyed the top rear of the military car. "Holy shit!" Alaya said, feeling so strong in the wind that hearing her voice fade away due to the cold of the loud noise. Claire ignored the strong wind that was fiercely shaking her hair and fired again at the tyrant, hitting its head a few times until the monster put out one of its arms in its face for protection. "Ah, try using this," Walter said, holding out a bag with a grenade launcher in it. Sherry quickly took the bag and picked up a gun. Reloading it with the acid round, she raised the gun and fired it at the monster, hitting it at the arm. The acid spread quickly, blowing towards the smoke as it ate away at the creature's firm flesh, which grunted and struggled, withdrawing its arm out of place, giving Claire the window to unload the Desert Eagle's clip to that thing's head. Sherry reloaded the grenade launcher with another acid round and fired, which, combined with Claire's shots, caused the tyrant to lose his grip and break free from the car, rolling violently on the ground. "Holy shit, we're going to let that thing prowl around free?" Sherry asked, alternating her gaze between everyone inside. "Don't worry, we didn't come alone," Walter said, and soon the chief helicopter flew above them, hitting the tyrant with hails of shots from the .50 caliber guns attached to the sides. The two women watched as the helicopter hit the tyrant's body again and again until the creature remained motionless and they were too far away to see anything else. They drove for a few more kilometers until they came across a dirt road. They drove for another half an hour until they came to a makeshift military camp, probably a team with only a few members. There were a few tents scattered around, a few masked soldiers in sight, and a few vehicles parked around. They looked like they'd been there for a while now. "I don't know about you, but that was too much of an adventure for me. It reminded me of why I need to stay behind in computer steams and research papers," Walter said, more to himself than other passengers. "I can agree with you," Alaya said, getting out of the car and looking at the damage to the back. "We now have a convertible," she joked, looking at joking in the attempt to see the tension, only to receive a snort from Walter, which she shrugged. "Look, we appreciate the help," Claire began, but both caught her attention. "But can you explain to us what's going on?" Alaya and Walter looked at each other, and then the man sighed. 17 hours and 20 minutes ago, Ghost left on a mission with your brother. 15 hours and 13 minutes, we lost contact with them. The helicopter they were in crashed, he explained. What? Sherry asked in disbelief, her expression of that of concern. They're fine. We picked up a message from Ghost saying that they're suffered and minor injuries. Our helicopters have a safety system for cases like that. Unfortunately, we have no way of rescuing them. We're out of helicopters. Walter sighed again, putting his laptop back in his bag. No helicopters? What do you mean? Claire asked. No helicopters, no equipment. We used for that after Wesker's attack. The vehicles we have, they don't have the resources we don't have to repair or refuel. But that's not the problem. They're capable of coming back. They should be on their way here by now, Alaya explained. The problem is the mercenary by the name Ida Wong has been hired by some powerful people to kill Ghost. Ida Wong. That name was not unfamiliar to her. Of course it wasn't. Ida Wong was a mercenary blacklisted by the BSAA and DSO, the anti-bioterrorism organizations. In fact, she was the same woman that they found in Raccoon City. They didn't miss her. And the real problem is that she has Ghost's and Hunk's files, the records, identities, examination logs, reports, everything. She has sent those files to some of the clients who hired her, Walter explained, and Claire crossed her arms, sighing with some regret. Well, shit, that's bad. Sherry and Walter laughed in mockery. Bad? That's terrible. I don't know about Hunker, but Ghost, they're certainly going after his family and everyone that connected with him. Claire blinked a few times, with a certain grimace still on her face. So he still had a family. I had imagined he already knows that, she said, and Walter confirmed it. Correct, and unfortunately we haven't been able to trace his family. They disappeared about 5 hours ago, Walter explained. Holy shit, not even a hint? A clue? Nothing? Sherry asked. We got no reason to suspect Derek Summons, but since our situation is precautious, we can't be so sure. The point is, Ghost won't care one bit who suspects us. He'll retaliate. We'll get out of hand, and since you're related to him, we had to get you out of that danger zone, Walter said. Sherry for her part nodded slightly. Claire for her part blinked a little confusedly. We're related to him? I don't see how they gained by a target for both of us, she said. As well as being related to Chris, we're from TerraSave. Simons would be going against the two major organizations at the same time. Our public image isn't really to be disadvantaged. No matter how corrupt our government is, she said, alternating her gaze between them. There was something there. Walter and Alaya looked at each other with uncertain eyes. I think you both should better go and get it, Walter said to the woman, who nodded and turned and started walking towards the main tent of the small camp. I thought we hadn't told you about yet. Stubborn as ever, the man said, almost in a whisper as if he were talking to himself. He turned around and walked inside the same direction Alaya had gone, followed by the two girls. What do you mean? Tell us what? Claire asked, a few steps behind the man. Well, you two have a realization. I have important for you enough to be a target, he said, and Claire made a confused face. I have no idea what you're talking about. We have nothing to do with each other. Walter laughed lightly, picking up the folder Alaya handed him. Of course you do, Miss Redfield. You both do. That's why you both deserve to know. After all, you're the reason why he exists, Walter said, holding out a folder for Claire. The woman looked at him, almost confused before, then slowly taking the folder from the man's hand. She scanned the first page, her eyes reading the letters that formed Project Agent 06 Ghost. Her gaze went up to Walter, who merely signaled for her to read the file in a hurried way. Curious and intrigued, she lifted the initial secret paper and felt a strange feeling in her chest. The noise around her seemed muffled. Her mouth went dry, her eyes went wide. She felt as if time passed slowly. Her gaze focused on the face of the younger officer, who had appeared so often in her dreams.